Rivalry week in the books. Let's take a look at some takeaways from the week. Miami, Tulane, and Ohio State all blew it. All had opportunities to win their conference, to play in their conference game. Tulane will be in the conference championship game, but they now probably don't have a shot to make the college football playoffs. Combined between Miami and Ohio State, they were 30-point favorites and they lost outright. And you add Tulane on that, who are 2 touchdown favorites to Memphis. That's 44-point favorites. All three lost outright. Huge losses for all three of those teams. They ended up blowing it. We'll talk a little bit more about Ryan Day in a little bit, but just horrible weeks for all three of those teams. That did open the door for a 3-loss SEC team getting into the college football playoff. We did think that it was probable and maybe likely as we entered into the week. This pretty much guarantees it. So between Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, I think one of those 3 teams will be in. It looks like it will probably be Alabama. But I think there will probably be an SEC team with 3 losses that will fill into one of the 10, 11, 12 spots. Okay, a lot of big controversy here. This was happening a lot this weekend. A lot of teams who are planting flags in their opponent's midfield logo. I love it. I think it's just so awesome and a part of college football, and the rivalry and the hatred spews out of these teams and these programs and these players. And I am all for planting the flag. If you're losing your rivalry game at home, I think the opponent can go plant the flag. And if you don't want that to happen, then beat them on the field. So I know it caused a lot of chaos, and so many teams were doing it this weekend. I loved it. I know the Michigan and Ohio State one was probably the craziest one because we saw pepper spray and police get involved, which was, wild and insane. But I am all for planting the flag. Like, hey, if you don't want that to happen, settle it in regulation. Lenore Sellers is an alien. He caused that Clemson defense to have so many fits. They just couldn't tackle him. That's just simple as that. The Clemson secondary did a great job of coverage to not to blanket those wide receivers, but that forced Lenore Sellers to scramble. The problem was Lenore Sellers is not human, and the Clemson defensive line and their front 7 could not tackle Lenore Sellers. If you take Lenore Sellers off of that South Carolina team, Clemson wins that game easily. It was Lenore Sellers put that team on his back, and he willed that team to victory. That was an incredible performance from Lenore Sellers. I would love to see him in the playoff and what he could do. But, next year he's going to be a problem. He's going to have a lot of bidders coming after him in the transfer portal. South Carolina is going to have to pony up to keep him because he is a freak, and he had an excellent game last weekend. All right, there's 3 teams in here that likely could be in the playoffs. Penn State is definitely in the playoffs, but there's 3 teams that I think could cause a lot of disruption if they do get into the playoffs. And that's SMU, Arizona State, and Penn State. I think all of those teams could get a win in this college football playoff. SMU, I still think, is being overlooked, even though they're in their conference championship. They have that loss to BYU when Kevin Jennings wasn't the starter, but since he has been the starter, they have had the pedal to the metal, and they have been rolling. They have that one close game to Duke, which they had 6 turnovers and was still able to pull out a win. By the way, that's a Duke team that was 9-3. So I think SMU is better than a lot of people may think, and I think it may show up in the ACC championship game, and I think it may show up in the college football playoff if they get there. And the same to be said with Arizona State. They had some trouble early on, but since then they have been rolling. And Sam Levitt and Cam Scatterbo, they've been great, and I think they can cause some problems. And then Penn State speaks for itself. Look, they've been blowing teams out. I know they have that loss to Ohio State, but they'll be in the conference championship with Oregon this weekend, and that's going to be a good one to watch. All right, Ohio State. They're our Lulz team of the week. They have a Ryan Day problem. It's just really bad. Ryan Day cannot get over this Michigan team. He has some sort of mental block then. It's really preventing him from beating this team. And you can maybe excuse the last 2 years because that Michigan team was elite. Like, they ended up winning a national championship last year. But this year, there is no excuse. Your roster is absolutely loaded. You probably have the best roster in the country, and you paid to have that roster. You cannot lay an egg at home, put up 10 points on this Michigan team that is just barely bowl eligible, and that just can't happen. And that's 4 years in a row now with Ryan Day. He really needs to get to the national championship this in the college football playoff. If he doesn't, I think we might be on grounds for, hey, yeah, I think we need to go different directions, because you can't lose like this. You can't lose to Michigan 4 years in a row with the team that you have, because if you're not going to beat them this year, man, Michigan's only going to be better. They're recruiting well. They are one of the best developmental programs in the country. It's just going to be hard to keep up with them, and we know what you're going to get. You lose to Michigan every single year. So that is a very bad loss for Ohio State, and puts Ryan Day in a very peculiar situation if he doesn't make some noise in the college football playoff. South Carolina, man, they feel like they got absolutely robbed in that LSU game, and they should. There was a couple of calls that didn't go their way. Obviously, the North Sellers got hurt in that game. If those calls don't get made, South Carolina's in the playoff. They're like where Tennessee is right now, at 10-2. But now they're in the discussions with Alabama and with Ole Miss as a 3-loss SEC team. Even though they still lost to those teams, they would be a 10-2 team with a win over Clemson. That LSU game really, really hurt them. And that was in week 3. So to think that that game and those calls were so imperative in week 3, it's really crazy. I'd be pissed if I were a Gamecock fan. All right, lastly, I've been saying this for weeks, and it was on full display again this weekend. The level of play between these conferences is not that big of a difference. We just saw Georgia Tech take Georgia, who's playing in the SEC championship, to 8 overtimes. We saw Clemson and South Carolina, 2 of the better teams in their conference. They had a game-winning drive and an interception. That was a close game. We saw a lot of these games in interconferences this weekend that were really close. And there's just not a big difference in these conferences this year. The SEC does not get the benefit of the doubt anymore. It's just not going to be that way. Not this year. I think every other year prior to this year, you can absolutely make that case. I think it'd be hard to argue against it. But the level of play this year is very, very level within conferences. And I think the committee needs to reward that and not look at bias as we enter into some of the final rankings of the college football playoff. Follow Big Body Ball CFP on all socials.